Success doesn't belong to the most talented, the most motivated, or even the most ambitious. In the long run, it belongs to those who build systems. Systems that keep producing results long after motivation fades, long after excitement wears off, and long after the crowd has moved on to something else. The world thinks success is about effort, but effort without structure leaks. Effort without systems burns out. Effort without direction becomes wasted potential. In this audiobook, we will pull back the curtain on how high achievers actually operate. Because behind every great career, every powerful transformation, every long-term win, there is a system quietly running in the background, turning dreams into processes, processes into habits, and habits into outcomes. When you understand this, you stop chasing success and you start engineering it. This audiobook will show you how to architect your definition of success, set up routines that work even when you don't feel like working, design environments that support your goals, build financial and mental models that compound over time, delegate and automate where possible, and maintain the machine so it never collapses under pressure. In this audiobook, we will build the foundation that most people ignore. We will replace wishful thinking with intentional design, and we will approach success the way builders and founders do, by constructing a system that makes winning inevitable. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Architect your definition of success. Most people are chasing success they haven't even defined. They wake up, work hard, stay busy, feel stressed, and wonder why nothing meaningful ever compounds. The reason is simple. You cannot build a system for an outcome you haven't described. Builders always start with a blueprint. Architects always begin with a vision. But most people begin with hustle. They begin with activity. They begin with noise. And activity without clarity leads to exhaustion instead of achievement. Before you can build a system, you must decide what the system is supposed to produce. Not vaguely, not loosely, not someday, but clearly, deliberately, and in detail. Your definition of success must be specific enough to guide action, yet flexible enough to grow with you. If your definition is too blurry, you'll drift. If it's too rigid, you'll break. The sweet spot is a vision anchored in purpose, with room for evolution as you mature. Here's the truth. Most people avoid defining success. Requires honesty. Not the social success you're supposed to want. Not the Instagram version. Not the version your parents imagined. Your version. What matters to you? What outcome would make you proud 10 years from now? What would make the struggle worth it? When you answer those questions, the noise around you loses power. Comparison fades. FOMO fades. Pressure fades. Because you finally know what you are actually trying to build. Once you define success, something else happens. Trade-offs become obvious. If you say, success for me is building a profitable business, I can operate from anywhere, then you instantly know which skills matter, which habits matter, and which opportunities are distractions, disguised as progress. When success is undefined, everything looks like a possibility. When success is defined, most things become irrelevant. That clarity is power. There's another layer to this, and it's crucial. Your definition of success must include lifestyle, not just achievement. Many people succeed on paper and fail in their actual life. They make money, but lose their health. They achieve status, but lose their peace. They become respected, but never become happy. The system you build cannot merely produce external wins. It must support a life worth living. So ask, what do I want my days to feel like? What pace do I want to move at? What energy do I want to bring into the world? Most people never ask those questions until it's too late. Now listen carefully. When you design your definition of success, you're not locking yourself in. You're giving yourself direction. Directions can change, But wandering is expensive. Wandering costs time, energy, money, confidence, and in many cases, identity. You don't need to know every detail of the journey. You need to know where you refuse to end up. And you need to know what matters enough to pursue. When you architect your definition of success, the system you build finally has a purpose. Without that, you're just building momentum, without meaning, and that never leads to the life you actually want. Chapter 2. Stop chasing results. Build the machine. Most people chase results because results are visible. Results are exciting. Results are what make other people pay attention. But what you see on the outside is only the final layer. Behind every impressive result lives an invisible machine, built piece by piece, refined over time, and sustained through systems. The problem is that society rewards outcomes, not the structures that created them. So we grow up obsessed with results, while ignoring the machinery of achievement itself. And this is why so many people work hard, yet remain stuck. They're chasing the fruit instead of learning how to grow the tree. Think about any field. In business, profit is the result. The machine is the product. The marketing, the customer service, the operations, and the financial systems. In fitness, the result is a strong body. The machine is the training, the nutrition, the sleep, and the habits. In writing, the result is a finished book. The machine is the daily writing routine, the discipline, the editing pipeline, and the ideas workflow. The moment you understand this distinction, you stop asking, how do I get the result? Then start asking, how do I build the machine that produces the result again and again? That shift alone separates amateurs from professionals. Results are temporary. Machines are durable. Results are one-time. Machines are repeatable. When you chase results, you must constantly start over. When you build the machine does the chasing for you. It works when you're tired. It works when you're uninspired. It works when life gets busy. Because systems don't rely on mood, they rely on structure. But here's the challenge. Building the machine is boring in the beginning. Results are exciting because they're visible to others. Systems are quiet and invisible. They don't shout. They don't brag. They don't give instant gratification. And because of that, most people abandon the system long before the results start to compound. They don't realize that compounding doesn't reward the impatient. It rewards the consistent. Let's pause here for a moment, because this matters. The person who wakes up and says, "I need to get rich," is already at a disadvantage compared to the person who says, "I need to build a financial system that never lets me stay poor." The person who says, "I need to get fit," is already behind the person who says, "I need to build a lifestyle that makes staying fit automatic." The person who says, "I want to write a book one day," is behind the person who says, "I need a writing system that produces pages every week." The difference isn't ambition, it's architecture. When you chase results, you become outcome dependent. You measure everything by whether the result has shown up yet. But results often lag behind the work. There is always a delay. Seeds take time to grow. Skills take time to stack. Trust takes time to build. Markets take time to reward. And if you quit during the delay, you never make it to the payoff. Because the payoff lives on the other side of patience. When you build the machine, your focus shifts from the scoreboard to the process. The scoreboard matters, but it is the final measurement, not the daily compass. Professionals don't rely on the scoreboard to stay motivated. They rely on systems that make progress inevitable. They build the routines, the workflows, the checklists, the feedback loops, the habits, and the environments that create progress, whether motivation is high or low. And here's a powerful truth. Once the machine is built, results become a side effect. They become the natural output of the inputs you've engineered. You no longer have to force success. You no longer have to chase it. You simply run the machine, and the machine produces the outcomes over time. This is why some people appear lucky. They aren't lucky. They're running a machine you can't see. Maybe no one ever told you this, but chasing results burns out the soul. It creates anxiety, comparison, impatience, insecurity, and stress. Building the machine builds confidence. Confidence comes from the quiet, knowing that your system is good, your structure is solid, and your machine works. You don't need to boast. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to rush. You just keep running the process, because you know where it leads. So if you want to change your life, stop asking for the outcome. Start designing the mechanism that produces it. The results will show up when they're ready. The machine comes first, always. Chapter 3. Install habits that work when you don't. There comes a point in every journey where motivation fades, energy dips, life gets loud, and circumstances get messy. This is where most dreams quietly die, not because people lacked ambition, but because they relied on feelings instead of systems. Feelings fluctuate, habits endure. And the real purpose of habits is not self-improvement for its own sake. It's the installation of behaviors that run even when you are tired, distracted, or unmotivated. In other words, habits keep the system running when the human operating it isn't at 100%. The mistake many people make is believing habits require discipline to maintain. It's actually the opposite. Habits are what replace discipline. Discipline is needed at the beginning, during installation, just like setting up a new machine requires initial effort. But once the machine is installed, it runs with minimal cognitive demand. The same goes for habits. You don't brush your teeth because you're disciplined. You brush them because the habit is installed. You don't check your phone in the morning because you're motivated. You check it because the habit is installed. Habits make behaviors automatic, and the automatic behaviors are what determine the trajectory of your life, far more than the heroic bursts of effort you perform on special days. Think about your goals for a moment. Goals tell you what you want. Habits tell you who you're becoming. And identity always beats desire. You can desire to be healthy, but if your habits are built around convenience food and sedentary living, identity wins. You can desire to be wealthy, but if your habits are built around impulse spending and no tracking, identity wins. You can desire to be creative, but if your habits are built around consumption instead of creation, identity wins. This is why lasting success always comes from installing habits that quietly support the identity you want to step into. But let's simplify this further. Habits are just repeated behaviors shaped by cues, environments, and rewards. If you want to create habits that work when you don't, you must design them to be 1. Simple to start, 2. Frictionless to perform, and 3. Satisfying enough to repeat. Complexity kills consistency. Many people fail not because they aimed too low, but because they aimed too high and made the habit too heavy to sustain. They decide they're going to run 5 miles every day, read for 2 hours every night, wake up at 4:30 a.m., but drink a gallon of water, meditate, journal, stretch, and overhaul their nutrition, all in 1 week. It feels good for 2 days, then life hits, and the stack collapses. You don't need an extreme plan. You need a sustainable system. The secret is scaling habits down to their smallest executable version. Want to become a writer? Write 1 sentence a day. Want to become fit? Commit to 5 push-ups or a 10-minute walk. Want to build financial awareness? Track 1 daily expense. These tiny actions may feel insignificant, but they are identity installations. They say, I am someone who shows up. And once the identity begins to take root, the volume of behavior naturally increases. You don't have to force growth. You upgrade the habit once the identity can support it. Another key element in installing habits that work without motivation is leveraging environment. Environment is stronger than willpower. If your phone is in reach, social media will win. If junk food is in the house, cravings will win. If your workspace is chaotic, procrastination will win. But if you prime your environment to support the habit becomes easier than the alternative. If you want to read, keep the book on your pillow. If you want to exercise, lay out the clothes the night before. If you want to write, keep the document open. Every habit has a trigger. The smart move is to design it intentionally. Finally, habits must be connected to feedback. Without feedback, habits become invisible. You must see the streak, measure the progress, or track the input. Not to judge yourself, but to reinforce the system. Humans are wired to repeat what they can see improving. This is why habit tracking works. It turns invisible progress into visible evidence, and visible evidence is fuel for consistency. In the end, the purpose of installing habits is simple: to remove your feelings from the equation. When habits are installed, life continues to move toward the outcome, even on the days you don't feel like participating. That is when success stops being dramatic and starts being inevitable. Chapter 4. Turn big goals into repeatable processes. Most people love big goals. Big goals feel inspiring. They make you feel like you're moving toward something meaningful. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Big goals without processes are just fantasies with deadlines. They sound impressive when you talk about them, but they don't translate into action. And when something doesn't translate into action, it doesn't compound. People get frustrated, not because their goals are impossible, but because their goals never became processes. They skip the bridge between vision and execution. Let's make this practical. Imagine 3 stages: the dream, the plan, and the process. The dream is the outcome. I want to build a successful business, or I want to lose 30 pounds, or I want to write a book, or I want financial freedom. The plan is the strategy, the how, the who, the when, the sequence. But the process is what you do on Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m. Most people stop at the dream, a few get to the plan, and very few build the process, and the results belong to the very few. Turning a big goal into a process removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is a silent killer of results. If you wake up and don't know the exact next step, the brain will always choose the easier option. The brain hates uncertainty more than it hates effort. This is why scrolling social media feels easier than starting something high value. One has clarity, the other has uncertainty. Processes eliminate decision fatigue. You don't wonder what to do, you already know. You just run the system. Here's the key distinction. Goals need motivation. Processes need consistency. Motivation is useful for starting, but it's terrible for sustaining. Consistency, on the other hand, doesn't care how you feel. A process is simply a sequence of actions that, when repeated, produce a predictable outcome. That predictability is what makes systems powerful. It means you're not guessing, you're not hoping, you're not improvising your way through life. You're executing. To build a process, you must reverse engineer the outcome. Start with the result you want. Ask, what produces this outcome? Once you identify the drivers, you ask again, what produces those drivers? You keep breaking it down until you arrive at small actions you can perform daily or weekly. That's the point where the big goal turns into behavior. If the behavior is impossible to perform consistently, you haven't broken it down far enough. For example, if the goal is to write a book, you don't need to write a book. You need a writing process. Write 500 words per day, at the same time, in the same place, with the same trigger. That process produces chapters. Chapters produce books. If the goal is to lose weight, you don't need to get shredded. You need a health process. Meal prepping twice per week. Training 3 times per week. 8 hours of sleep nightly, and tracking calories or protein. That process produces transformation. If the goal is financial freedom, you don't need to make more money. You need a financial process. Track expenses weekly, invest monthly, and expand earning ability through skill acquisition. That process produces wealth. Systems are simply processes that compound. But here's something most people overlook. Processes must be realistic relative to your life context. You can't build a process that requires more discipline than you can generate, more time than you can allocate, or more complexity than you can sustain. A good process feels doable, even on stressful days. A great process works even on bad days. The best processes keep working when you're tired, busy, or unmotivated. Another critical element is measurement. What gets measured adjusts. When you measure the process instead of the outcome, you get faster course correction. If the process is producing progress, you continue. If the process isn't producing progress, you iterate. Without measurement, you can't tell whether the system needs patience or redesign. And this distinction matters because many people quit systems that would have worked if they simply kept going. Others keep running systems that never work because they never evaluated them. When you succeed, it's not because you achieved a goal, it's because you built a process that made achieving the goal inevitable. And once that process exists, you can scale it, refine it, delegate it, automate it, or compound it. That's how big success is built, not from one heroic effort, but from many small actions repeated over time. This is how you stop being a dreamer. This is how you become a builder. Chapter 5. Engineer environments that pull you forward. Most people try to change their lives through sheer willpower, not realizing that willpower is the weakest force in human behavior. Environment is stronger than willpower. Environment shapes what you notice, what you choose, what you repeat, and what you tolerate. If you want to change your results, you don't need to become superhuman. You need to engineer an environment that makes your desired behavior easier and your undesired behavior harder. When the environment is designed correctly, progress feels natural instead of forced. Think of it this way. There are two versions of you, the motivated version and the tired version. The motivated version will go to the gym, read the book, work on the project, and say no to distractions. The tired version will skip the workout, scroll the phone, and postpone the important tasks to later. Most people try to build their lives assuming the motivated version will show up every day. The smarter strategy is building a life that supports the tired version. That's the version that needs help. That's the version that needs design. Environment is not just physical, it is digital, social, emotional, and even ideological. Your physical environment influences your habits. Your digital environment influences your attention. Your social environment influences your standards. Your emotional environment influences your decisions. And your ideological environment shapes your worldview, what you believe is possible or normal. When all of these environments are aligned, momentum becomes automatic. Start with the obvious physical environment. The objects around you either create friction or remove friction. If you want to read more, keep books visible, not hidden in drawers. If you want to exercise, keep your workout clothes ready. If you want to eat healthier, stock the kitchen with what aligns with your goals and eliminate what doesn't. People talk about discipline, but discipline is often just the absence of temptation within reach. Small physical changes can reshape behavior more effectively than motivational speeches. Now consider digital environment. Your phone, computer, and online world constantly compete for your attention. Notifications have been engineered to hijack your focus, not support your goals. If your digital environment is chaotic, your mental bandwidth will be drained before you ever get to what matters. A high-performing digital environment is organized, intentional, and filtered. Turn off non-essential notifications. Clean up your digital workspace. Unfollow content that steals your attention without feeding your ambition. Digital chaos is a modern form of self-sabotage. Then there's social environment, the people you interact with, and the expectations they set. Most goals die because they are pursued in the wrong social environment. If you surround yourself with people who take pride in complaining, procrastinating, gossiping, or settling, those behaviors will feel normal. But if you surround yourself with builders, learners, and disciplined individuals, those behaviors become normal instead. Humans are tribal by nature. We rise or fall to the expectations of our tribe. Choose your tribe wisely. Emotional environment matters as well. This one is often overlooked. If your environment constantly triggers stress, insecurity, or distraction, your brain will prioritize survival over growth. Growth requires psychological safety, not constant threat response. This doesn't mean life must be comfortable. It means you must eliminate unnecessary emotional noise. View it like cleaning a workshop. You cannot build something precise if dust keeps falling onto the project. Finally, ideological environment refers to the ideas and narratives you expose yourself to. If you consume stories of victimhood, limitation, and hopelessness, those ideas become mental frameworks. If you consume stories of resilience, strategy, and achievement, those ideas become frameworks too. Your brain cannot outperform its own belief system. This is why books, mentors, and content matter. They don't just teach, they recalibrate what you perceive as normal. When you engineer environments that pull you forward, you no longer have to rely on motivation to get things done. The environment does the pushing. Progress becomes less about fighting yourself and more about aligning your surroundings with who you want to become. In the long run, the environment always wins. The smartest path is to make sure it's winning in your favor. Chapter 6. Remove friction from your future. Success isn't just about doing more. It's about removing the invisible obstacles that keep you from doing what you already know you should be doing. Most people assume their problem is laziness or lack of motivation, but more often it's friction, those small barriers that slow down action just enough to cause hesitation, and hesitation eventually becomes avoidance. Friction doesn't have to be dramatic to be destructive. It just has to be persistent. Think about how easy it is to do things that require no setup. Checking your phone, scrolling social media, snacking, or watching something online. These behaviors are frictionless. They require no preparation, no planning, no tools, no mental load. Now compare that to behaviors with friction: cooking a meal, going to the gym, working on a long-term project, or learning a new skill. These require thought, setup, time, and a clean space. The brain is wired to avoid friction whenever possible, not because it hates growth, but because growth costs energy, and the brain's default survival mode is to conserve energy, not spend it. Removing friction means making the right behaviors easier to start, and the wrong behaviors harder to engage with. For example, if you want to exercise in the morning, put your clothes out the night before. That eliminates the decision. If you want to eat healthy, prep meals or organize groceries so that the healthy option is the convenient one. If you want to write daily, keep your tools, laptop, notebook, document ready and accessible instead of buried in folders. Every time you reduce friction, you reduce the cognitive tax required to get started, and starting is often the hardest part. But friction doesn't only exist in the physical world. There is also digital friction, the clutter of apps, notifications, messages, and tabs pulling you in 10 different directions. Digital friction steals attention, and attention is the payment required for progress. If it takes you 5 minutes to find the right file, or if your writing space is filled with distractions, you're not lazy, you're working against unnecessary resistance. Digital minimalism isn't an aesthetic choice, it's an efficiency strategy. Remove the clutter and the brain can finally focus. There's also emotional friction. This type is powerful because it hides behind procrastination. Emotional friction sounds like, what if I fail? What if I look stupid? What if this isn't good enough? Or what if it doesn't work? These doubts create hesitation, and hesitation creates delay. If you don't address emotional friction, you'll unconsciously avoid the very behaviors that could change your life. The solution isn't to suppress fear, but to reduce the stakes. Instead of trying to write a perfect chapter, write for 10 minutes. Instead of launching a business, test one small offer. Instead of reinventing your life, change one routine. Small steps reduce the emotional weight. Then there's logistical friction, the kind that comes from poor structure. If everything in your life must be manually planned, scheduled, remembered and coordinated, you will eventually drown in micro-decisions. Systems thrive on predictability. Predictability eliminates logistical friction. A simple schedule can outperform heroic intentions. A weekly plan can outperform sporadic sprints. The more you standardize, the less willpower you need. One of the most underestimated forms of friction is social friction, people who slow you down or pull you sideways. If you are surrounded by people who question your goals, interrupt your routines, or discourage your focus, you'll need twice the effort to produce half the results. Social friction doesn't always come from toxic relationships. Sometimes it comes from misaligned priorities. You don't need to cut people out of your life, but you do need to protect the parts of your life that matter. Removing friction is not about making life effortless. It's about removing unnecessary resistance, so effort can flow toward progress rather than toward fighting obstacles. Imagine two runners. One is sprinting on pavement, the other is sprinting through mud. The second runner isn't less ambitious, he's just running in an environment that fights him. Many people are sprinting through mud without realizing they could change the ground beneath them. The secret is simple: make the right actions easy and the wrong actions difficult. When your environment, tools, schedule and habits remove friction from your future, progress becomes less about force and more about momentum. That's how systems win, not by overpowering your weaknesses, but by removing the things that endlessly trip you up. Chapter 7. Create mental models that make better decisions. Every successful system begins with good decisions, and every good decision begins with how you think. The world likes to celebrate action, hustle, and effort. But what separates average performers from extraordinary ones isn't just that they work harder, it's that they think better. They see patterns others don't. They predict consequences others ignore. They understand cause and effect, and they adjust before the rest of the world reacts. This ability doesn't come from talent. It comes from mental models, frameworks that help you interpret reality accurately and make decisions efficiently. A mental model is simply a structured way of thinking about how something works. Without mental models, life feels random and chaotic. Small setbacks become crises, and obstacles feel personal. But with mental models, setbacks become data, and obstacles become design problems. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding intelligently, and that shift changes everything. We often underestimate how much thinking shapes outcomes. If your only model for financial success is work hard, you might work for decades without building wealth. If your only model for health is eat less and move more, you'll struggle because that ignores nutrition, psychology, environment, and hormonal balance. If your only model for relationships is try to be nice, You won't understand communication, boundaries, conflict, or compatibility. The more limited your models, the more limited your results. One of the most powerful mental models is second-order thinking, looking beyond the first consequence and asking, and then what? Most people stop at the immediate payoff, the dopamine hit, the convenience, the shortcut. But second-order thinkers look at long-term outcomes. Choosing entertainment over learning feels good now, but what compound does that create? Choosing convenience over discipline feels easy today, but what future does that build? Second-order thinking builds systems that serve your future self, not just your present mood. Another influential model is inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" ask, "How do I avoid failing?" If you want to get in shape, ask, "What are the behaviors that guarantee failure?" and remove them. If you want to build wealth, ask, "What destroys wealth?" and avoid those traps. Inversion simplifies complex goals by revealing the obvious mistakes everyone makes. It's easier to eliminate failure variables than to perfectly optimize winning variables. Then there's opportunity cost, the idea that every choice has a hidden price, the value of what you didn't choose. People often say yes to things that feel harmless without recognizing the cost. Saying yes to overtime might cost your health. Saying yes to distractions might cost your skill development. Saying yes to social obligations might cost your business momentum. When you understand opportunity cost, no becomes a strategic tool, not a negative word. Consider also the model of feedback loops. Most outcomes are not linear, they compound through iteration. When you build feedback into your system, improvement becomes automatic. Pilots have checklists, investors have reports, athletes have coaches, creators have revisions, builders have audits. Without feedback loops, you repeat mistakes. With them you evolve. Mental models don't just improve decision-making, they reduce emotional volatility. When something goes wrong, instead of spiraling, you analyze. Instead of taking it personally, you ask, what variable did I miss? What assumption was flawed? What feedback is reality giving me? This mindset moves you from victimhood to agency. Life becomes less about what happens to you and more about how you respond to it. Most people never upgrade their models. They keep using childhood rules in an adult world. They rely on motivational slogans instead of strategy. They assume effort alone determines success. But effort without understanding is just expensive trial and error. The right model can save you years of trial and error. And here's the key, you don't need hundreds of models. Even a handful can transform your trajectory. Models for making decisions, models for learning, models for risk, models for time, models for relationships, and models for money. Each one sharpens your thinking. Each one upgrades your system for success. When you install better mental models, life becomes less chaotic and more intentional. You stop relying on luck, emotion, and impulse. You start relying on structure, reason, and perspective. That's how systems think. And when you learn to think in systems, success stops being something you chase and starts being something you design. Chapter 8. Build a financial system that pays you back. Money is one of the clearest examples that results come from systems, not wishes. Most people want financial freedom, but they rely on hope instead of architecture. They want higher income without building the skills that produce it. They want investments without building the discipline to fund them. They want wealth without constructing the financial behaviors that make wealth inevitable. Money doesn't respond to desire, money responds to systems. A financial system has three core parts: earning, keeping, and multiplying. Most people only focus on earning. They chase higher salaries, side hustles, promotions, or business ideas. And while earning is important, it is only 1/3 of the engine. If you increase earnings without building systems for keeping and multiplying money, income becomes lifestyle fuel instead of wealth fuel. It disappears as fast as it arrives. This is why many people earn more than they've ever earned and still end up stressed, paycheck to paycheck, or drowning in obligation. Income without a system becomes consumption. Let's start with the first component, earning. Income is not just about how hard you work, it's about the market value of what you can do. If you want to raise your income, you must increase one or more of three things: your skill value, your leverage, or your scale. Skill value is the difficulty and rarity of what you can produce. Leverage is your ability to achieve more output than the hours you put in, through technology, capital, tools, or people. Scale is how many people your output can reach or serve. A financial system acknowledges these levers and upgrades them intentionally, not accidentally. But earning alone isn't enough. You must also keep money. This is where financial systems begin to separate people. Keeping money isn't about extreme frugality, it's about awareness, allocation, and avoiding silent leaks. Many people are not broke because they don't earn enough, but because they don't track where money flows. Untracked money evaporates. A personal financial system includes tracking expenses, intentional budgeting, and aligning spending with priorities instead of impulses. Money should have a purpose before it leaves your account. When money doesn't have a purpose, other people's priorities will claim it. Then comes the third component, multiplying. This is where financial systems truly begin to pay you back. Multiplying money means converting a portion of your earnings into assets, things that produce returns instead of bills. Assets can take many forms: investments, businesses, rental properties, digital assets, intellectual property, skills that produce future cash, or systems that generate passive or leveraged income. The purpose of multiplying is simple: shift your financial reality from working for money to money working for you. However, multiplication requires one more ingredient: time. Compounding does not reward the impatient. That's why a financial system must also protect against behaviors that sabotage compounding: panic selling, lifestyle inflation, inconsistent investing, and short-term thinking. Wealth is not just an economic concept, it is a psychological one. If you cannot control your impulses, you cannot control your financial trajectory. The system protects you from yourself. But here's something rarely discussed. Financial systems also include how you handle information. Most people operate financially using outdated models. School taught them math, but never taught them money. They were trained to be earners, not builders. A modern financial system includes education, books, courses, mentors, and financial frameworks that upgrade your understanding. You don't need to become an economist, but you do need a model for how money works, how markets behave, and how value is created. Financial systems also include protection, insurance, emergency funds, legal structures, and risk hedging are not exciting topics, but they are foundational. Wealth collapses not from lack of growth, but from lack of protection. Without protection systems, one emergency can erase 10 years of progress. Builders don't just ask, "How do I grow?" They ask, "How do I not lose what I've already built?" The most important mindset shift is this: wealthy people don't rely on income. They rely on systems. Systems that generate cash flow, systems that reinvest automatically, systems that reduce tax drag, systems that convert time into assets, systems that continue working even when they stop. When you build a financial system that pays you back, you exit the survival economy and enter the strategic economy. Money stops being something you chase and becomes something you manage, direct, and multiply. That is when financial freedom stops being a dream and starts being math. Chapter 9. Optimize your time. Like a founder, time is the only resource every human receives in identical daily amounts. Yet the gap in outcomes between people can be enormous. Why? Because most people manage their time reactively, while high performers manage it strategically. Founders, CEOs and operators don't treat time as something to spend, they treat it as something to allocate. They don't fill their days with tasks. They design their days around priorities. They don't ask, how do I stay busy? They ask, what moves the needle? And that simple shift changes everything. Most people lose time in 3 places: lack of clarity, lack of structure, and lack of constraints. When you don't know what matters most, everything feels equally urgent. When you don't have structure, your attention gets hijacked by interruptions. And when you don't have constraints, work expands to fill whatever time you give it. This is the reason many people feel like they're always working but never achieving. They're living inside a time system built on reaction, not intention. Founders build systems for time. One of the first tools is prioritization. Not everything deserves attention, and not everything deserves attention now. The goal is not to complete everything. The goal is to complete the few things that change the trajectory. This is where the idea of leverage becomes essential. There are tasks with low leverage, maintenance tasks, busy work, errands, and there are tasks with high leverage, strategy, skill development, system building, relationships, creation, and long-term thinking. A founder knows that 1 hour spent on a high-leverage activity can produce more results than 10 hours spent on low-leverage motion. But prioritization alone isn't enough. Time also needs containers. Without containers, projects bleed into each other, attention becomes fragmented, and tasks expand without limit. Time blocking, batching, and scheduling are not productivity fads. They are constraint mechanisms. They force tasks into defined boundaries. When you batch similar tasks, emails, messages, administrative work, your brain stays in the same cognitive mode, reducing context switching. Context switching is one of the most underrated performance killers. Every switch carries a mental cost. You cannot build momentum if you're constantly resetting your brain. Another key concept founders understand is energy management. Not all hours are equal. Some hours you are sharp, others you are foggy. Some hours are creative, others are mechanical. High performers arrange their schedules around energy, not just time. They place deep work, writing, planning, building, problem solving during peak cognitive hours. They place shallow work, emails, calls, errands during lower energy periods. This alignment avoids wasting prime mental energy on trivial tasks and preserves momentum for meaningful work. And then there is decision fatigue. Every decision drains a portion of your cognitive battery. This is why many high performers reduce unnecessary decisions, meals, clothes, planning routines, or morning rituals. They simplify the insignificant so they can allocate decision power to what matters. Most people burn their best cognitive energy on micro decisions before noon and wonder why they can't focus when it counts. But optimizing time isn't just about productivity. It's also about protecting attention. Attention is the gateway to depth. Depth produces breakthroughs. Yet modern life is engineered to shatter attention into fragments, notifications, messages, alerts, and social media. If you don't protect your attention, the world will monetize it for you. A founder guards their calendar, guards their focus, and guards their mental space. They know that every interruption has a cost, and that cost compounds. Founders also design for margin, buffer space for unexpected tasks, emergencies, and creative thought. A schedule with no margin collapses at the first sign of disruption. Life is not predictable enough for a zero-margin system. Margin creates stability, and stability creates consistency. Finally, optimizing time includes reviewing time. Without reflection, you cannot see patterns. You don't know what to eliminate, what to outsource, what to automate, or what to optimize. A simple weekly review can reveal what stole time, what created progress, and what needs redesign. Time systems improve through feedback, just like financial systems or operational systems. When you begin to optimize time, like a founder, life becomes less reactive and more engineered. You stop being busy and start being effective. You stop living inside the clock and start directing the clock. And when time is directed instead of spent, success begins to compound. Chapter 10. Recruit better inputs, not just better effort. Most people assume success is about how hard you work. They believe that if they just try a little harder, push a little more, grind a little longer, eventually the breakthrough will come. But effort without the right inputs is like pouring more water into a leaking bucket. You're increasing volume, not improving outcomes. Systems think differently. They don't ask, how can I work harder? They ask, what inputs produce the output I want? Because when the inputs improve, the outputs follow automatically. Inputs come in many forms. Information is an input. Skill is an input. Tools are input. Environments are inputs. Relationships are inputs. Feedback is an input. These are the raw materials that determine what your system can produce. If you feed your system poor information, low standards, or inefficient tools, it doesn't matter how much effort you supply, the output will be limited. It's impossible to bake a world-class cake with spoiled ingredients, no matter how hard you stir the bowl. Let's start with informational inputs. The world is saturated with content, endless opinions, noise, and conflicting advice. Consuming the wrong information doesn't just waste time, it leads you down incorrect paths and reinforces flawed assumptions. High performers curate information like a chef curates ingredients. They choose books over random blogs, mentors over critics, research over rumors. They upgrade their informational inputs, and as a result, their decision-making compounds. Skill inputs are another layer. A system built on weak skills collapses under pressure. Wanting to scale a business without acquiring skills in sales, marketing, operations, or leadership is wishful thinking disguised as ambition. Wanting to manage money without understanding finance is like driving blindfolded. Skills convert effort into leverage. The more skill you have, the more each hour is worth. This is why two people can work the same number of hours and produce radically different outcomes. Skill changes the conversion rate of effort into results. Then there are tool inputs. Tools determine efficiency. A carpenter with dull tools cannot outperform a carpenter with sharp ones, no matter how motivated he is. In modern life, tools include software, automation, frameworks, systems, and strategies. The right tools amplify output, reduce friction, and compress time. Many people still operate with outdated tools and outdated workflows, then blame themselves for the lack of progress. Feedback is one of the most powerful inputs, and also one of the most ignored. Without feedback, the system never improves. Feedback tells you what's working, what's broken, and what needs redesign. But feedback requires humility. It forces you to confront reality instead of fantasy. Builders love feedback because it accelerates iteration. Amateurs avoid feedback because it threatens ego. If you want better results, seek reality, not validation. Relationships are inputs too. The people you surround yourself with either elevate your standards or normalize your mediocrity. You don't rise to the level of your ambition, you rise to the level of your ecosystem. If your ecosystem gossips, complains, and avoids responsibility, you will gradually absorb those inputs. If your ecosystem builds, learns, experiments, and executes, you will absorb those too. Humans are mimetic creatures. We learn by imitation more than instruction. Your environment teaches you how to behave, even when no one is talking about behavior. Energy inputs matter as well. Sleep, nutrition, training, sunlight, and rest are not lifestyle luxuries. They are performance variables. Many people sabotage their own systems because they try to squeeze productivity out of a body that is depleted. You cannot build a high-performance life on low-performance energy. The human machine needs fuel, recovery, and maintenance. Energy turns effort into capacity. When you start recruiting better inputs, something interesting happens. Your effort suddenly becomes more effective, without any extra struggle. Better inputs raise your baseline. They improve your conversion rate. They create leverage. Most breakthroughs come not from pushing harder, but from upgrading the components that make pushing unnecessary. The world will keep telling you to try harder, want it more, and hustle longer. But the people who consistently win don't merely push, they improve the materials they are working with. They upgrade their inputs. They recruit better tools. They learn better models. They seek better feedback. They surround themselves with better standards. And when the inputs improve, effort becomes powerful instead of exhausting. Chapter 11. Systemize relationships and support structures. Success may look individual on the surface, but it is rarely achieved alone. Behind every high achiever, every breakthrough, every major transformation, there are people, mentors, collaborators, advisors, partners, supporters, and sometimes even rivals, who influence the direction and quality of the journey. Yet most people approach relationships emotionally and randomly, not strategically. They depend on hope and luck, instead of structure and intention. To build a life where success becomes repeatable, you must systemize relationships and support structures. Let's begin with the idea of relational roles. Not all relationships serve the same purpose, and not all relationships should be managed the same way. You need peers who push you, mentors who guide you, collaborators who build with you, supporters who encourage you, and critics who sharpen you. When these roles are missing, you end up trying to fulfill every need yourself, learning alone, building alone, thinking alone, struggling alone. That isolation makes the journey harder, slower, and more exhausting than it needs to be. One of the most valuable relationship systems is mentorship. A good mentor compresses time. They offer you decades of insight in minutes. They help you avoid mistakes. Most people only learn through pain and delay. But mentorship doesn't happen by accident. You must create a system to seek it, maintain it, and learn from it. Many people mistakenly assume mentors should do the chasing, teaching, and effort. But the opposite is true. Mentees must drive the relationship. They must bring questions, updates, context, and gratitude. When mentorship is systemized, it scales your wisdom without requiring you to personally experience every failure. Peers are another essential part of the relational system. Peers shape your standards. If you surround yourself with people who normalize drifting, quitting, complaining, or numbing themselves with distraction, your standards will quietly lower without you noticing. But if your peers normalize learning, building, executing, and improving, then excellence becomes the default. Humans mirror the behaviors of their group, so choose a group where the behaviors are worth mirroring. Then there are collaborators, people who build with you. Collaboration is a leverage strategy. It combines complementary skills, accelerates execution, and distributes the workload. Yet collaboration only works when roles are clear, expectations are aligned, and communication is consistent. Without structure, collaboration becomes chaos. Systemizing collaboration means defining who does what, how decisions are made, how conflict is handled, and how accountability is maintained. When collaboration is structured, it multiplies results. When it is unstructured, it multiplies stress. Support networks matter as well, especially emotional support. Success is often portrayed as a logical pursuit, but much of it is emotional resilience, navigating doubt, disappointment, uncertainty, and setbacks. A strong support system keeps you grounded during turbulence. It reminds you of the bigger vision when your confidence dips. It stabilizes your psychology. Many talented people fail not because they lack skill or strategy, but because they lacked support when they needed it most. Feedback systems also play a critical role. Feedback from others provides external perspective. You cannot see your blind spots from the inside. You need people who will tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. But feedback must be systemized, not accidental. It must come from people who understand the standard you're aiming for. Random criticism from unqualified voices does not help, it confuses. Structured feedback accelerates growth. Unstructured feedback kills momentum. One of the most overlooked relationship systems is accountability. Accountability changes behavior because it introduces consequence. When you tell someone you'll deliver, you're far more likely to follow through. Accountability partners, progress check-ins, and shared goals all create pressure. Not destructive pressure, but constructive pressure. Pressure that lifts your standard. Finally, boundary systems protect you from relational drag. Not every relationship deserves unlimited access. Some people drain mental energy, derail focus, or discourage ambition. Without boundaries, high performers burn out trying to carry the emotional weight of others. Boundaries are not selfish, they are structural. They keep the system healthy. A system without boundaries eventually collapses under overload. When you systemize relationships and support structures, you transform your social world from a random collection of people into a strategic ecosystem that fuels your growth. You stop hoping for support and start engineering it. You stop waiting for the right people to show up and start curating them. And once your social environment is structured intentionally, success stops being heavy and begins to feel supported, scalable, and sustainable. Chapter 12. Delegate, automate, and outsource to scale. Scaling is what separates effort-based success from system-based success. Anyone can push harder for a season. Anyone can grind for a period of time. But no one can outwork the limitations of a 24-hour day forever. If the only way you make progress is by adding more effort, more hours, or more personal sacrifice, you haven't built a system, you've built a trap. Real scaling begins when you remove yourself as the bottleneck and shift from doing everything to designing how everything gets done. That transition requires 3 levers: delegation, automation, and outsourcing. Let's start with delegation. Delegation is not just assigning tasks, it is transferring responsibility. Many people resist delegation for 2 reasons. They don't trust others to execute, or they don't want to lose control. But high performers understand that if every decision, task, and project must pass through you, you become the single point of failure. Delegation requires clarity, clarity of expectations, clarity of deadlines, and clarity of standards. Without clarity, delegation collapses into confusion. With clarity, delegation becomes multiplication, one person's vision, executed by many hands. But delegation alone isn't enough. What can be automated should be automated. Automation is leverage without supervision. It removes repetitive tasks from your plate and turns them into background processes. In a digital world, automation appears everywhere: email sequences, payment systems, scheduling tools, reminders, file management, marketing pipelines, data syncing, customer support, FAQs, and operational checklists. Every automated process frees cognitive energy. The more cognitive energy you reclaim, the more you can allocate to strategy, creativity, and decision-making, the domains that machines cannot yet replace. Then there's outsourcing. Outsourcing is buying time. Instead of learning to become a designer, you hire one. Instead of spending hours fixing technical issues, you pay someone who can solve them in minutes. Outsourcing is not a cost, it is a conversion. You convert money into time, and time into higher value output. The mistake people make is believing they cannot afford to outsource. The better question is, can you afford not to? If you spend 10 hours doing something that someone else could do for $50, you have just valued your time at $5 per hour. Scaling requires you to raise the internal value of your time. But here's a critical point. You also must determine what not to scale. Not everything needs leverage. Not everything deserves delegation. Some activities require personal touch. Some decisions require founder judgment. Some creative work must flow through you. Systems are not about removing yourself from everything. They are about removing yourself from everything that doesn't require you. This preserves your energy for the high-leverage arenas: vision, direction, leadership, and innovation. Another essential part of scaling is documentation. You cannot delegate what you cannot describe. You cannot outsource what you cannot explain. You cannot automate what you haven't standardized. Many people fail at scaling because their processes live in their head. They become the operating system, and no one can replicate their mind. Documentation externalizes the system so it can be executed without you. Checklists, SOPs, templates, scripts, and workflow diagrams are not corporate bureaucracy. They are tools that turn chaos into predictable output. Airlines, hospitals, and manufacturing plants rely on them because lives depend on reliability. Your success depends on reliability too. Scaling also requires diagnosing bottlenecks. Every system has a point where progress slows. Sometimes the bottleneck is skill, sometimes it's capital, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's time. The job of a builder is not to remove all obstacles but to identify the one constraint holding everything else back, and remove that first. Scaling is rarely about doing more. It is about freeing the constraint that unlocks more. And here's the mindset shift. Scaling is not selfish, it is generous. When you scale, you create more value than you could alone. You support more customers, serve more people, build stronger communities, and create more opportunity. You stop trading hours for output and start trading design for output. Most people live inside systems that collapse the moment they stop working. They build a life that functions only when they are pushing. But true success is when the machine keeps running, even when you step back. Delegation frees your hands. Automation frees your time. Outsourcing frees your mind. Together they free your future. Chapter 13. Audit the system regularly. A system is only as strong as its ability to evolve. What works today may become inefficient tomorrow. What was innovative last year may be outdated next year. Markets change, lifestyles change, priorities change, environments change, and if the system doesn't adapt with you, it becomes dead weight instead of leverage. This is why auditing is essential. Auditing prevents stagnation. Auditing reveals friction. Auditing exposes waste. Auditing upgrades performance. Most people build routines once and never revisit them. High performers build routines and then refine them constantly. Think of it like a machine. A machine that never gets inspected, eventually breaks down, bearings wear, components loosen. Efficiency drops. Output declines. Maintenance isn't punishment, it's protection. Yet in life we treat our goals, habits, finances, relationships, and environments, like machines that should operate forever without inspection. We assume everything will work as long as we care enough. But caring isn't a maintenance plan. Auditing is. Auditing begins with awareness, asking what is working, what isn't, and why. This requires honesty without ego. Many people cling to systems that once worked simply because they feel attached to them. But the rule of systems is simple. If it no longer serves the mission, it must be redesigned or removed. You don't keep outdated processes out of comfort. You update them out of responsibility. Audits should focus on both performance and friction. Performance asks, is this producing the desired outcome? Friction asks, is this harder than it needs to be? Sometimes the system is producing results, but at too high a cost, too much time, too much stress, or too much complexity. That is success without sustainability, and sustainability matters. You don't want systems that burn you out. You want systems that outlast you. There are several domains worth auditing. Audit your goals. Are they still relevant? Have they evolved? Do they need refinement? Audit your habits. Are they still serving the identity you're becoming? Audit your financial systems. Are you allocating correctly? Investing consistently. Eliminating leaks. Audit your environment. Does it support focus or sabotage it? Audit your social world. Do your peers normalize growth or stagnation? Audit your digital world. Are you drowning in distraction without realizing it? Audit your time. Are you spending it intentionally or reactively? Each domain reveals leverage points. Another part of auditing is removing waste. Waste hides in routines that no longer matter, commitments that no longer align, tasks that no longer produce value, and obligations that no longer serve the mission. Waste pretends to be productivity. It keeps you busy. It keeps you stressed. It keeps you feeling like you're working. But it doesn't move the needle. Eliminating waste creates space for what actually matters. And space is a high-performance asset. The audit process also involves upgrading, not just eliminating. Once inefficiencies are identified, ask, can this be simplified? Can this be automated? Can this be delegated? Can this be compressed? Can this be standardized? Optimization compounds over time. A 5% efficiency gain repeated across multiple processes can change your entire trajectory. Feedback should be integrated into audits as well. You cannot see everything from the inside. Ask mentors, peers, customers, or trusted voices where they see bottlenecks. External feedback often reveals what internal perspective hides. But remember, feedback must come from relevant sources. Not everyone has earned the right to influence your system. Finally, audits require rhythm. If you audit once a year, you react too slowly. If you audit every week, you create instability. Systems need enough time to operate before they can be evaluated. A good rhythm for most people is weekly micro-audits, monthly adjustments, and quarterly redesigns. Weekly audits answer, what needs small fixes? Monthly audits answer, what needs improvement? Quarterly audits answer, what needs transformation? Auditing prevents drift. Drift happens quietly. You don't notice the shift until the gap becomes large. Without audits, dreams drift into frustration, routines drift into stagnation, finances drift into imbalance, and standards drift into mediocrity. But with audits, you stay aligned, aware, and adaptive. That is how systems mature. That is how momentum is preserved. And that is how long-term success becomes inevitable instead of accidental. Chapter 14. Replace identity, not just behavior. Most self-improvement attempts fail for one simple reason. They try to change behavior without upgrading identity. Behavior sits on the surface. Identity sits at the foundation. Behavior says, I want to do this. Identity says, I am the kind of person who does this. And in the battle between behavior and identity, identity always wins. You can force yourself to act differently for a while, but eventually you will act like the kind of person you believe yourself to be. Systems become powerful when they change not just what you do, but who you are becoming. Think about how most people try to change. They set goals, make plans, and attempt to will themselves into new routines. They might wake up early for a few days, eat clean for a week, save money for a month, or study consistently for a short season. But then stress hits, life gets busy, motivation dips, and they collapse back into old patterns. The problem wasn't desire. The problem wasn't intelligence. The problem wasn't even discipline. The problem was that the internal identity never changed, so the external behavior had no foundation to sit on. Identity acts like the brain's inner autopilot. If your identity says, I'm not a disciplined person, then any behavior requiring discipline feels temporary and unsustainable. If your identity says, I'm bad with money, then financial habits feel unnatural. If your identity says, I'm not a healthy person, then fitness efforts feel forced, fragile, and burdensome. People don't sabotage their goals, they protect their identities. Even negative identities become comfortable, because the brain loves familiarity more than improvement. To replace identity, you need to change the story you live inside. Humans are storytelling creatures. We don't just experience life, we narrate it. We explain our failures, justify our habits, excuse our patterns, and build beliefs around our past. But here's the truth: stories are not facts. Stories are interpretations, and interpretations can be rewritten. You do not have to inherit the identity your past built. You can build a new one through evidence. Identity is reinforced by evidence. You become the kind of person who trains when you start showing up for training. You become the kind of person who learns when you start reading consistently. You become the kind of person who manages money when you start tracking and allocating. Every small repetition plants a vote for a new identity. This is why small wins matter. They are not just progress, they are proof. To shift identity, begin with identity-based questions. Who do I want to become, and what would that kind of person do on a normal Tuesday? Identity becomes real when it becomes behavioral. A writer writes, a runner runs, a leader leads, a disciplined person honors commitments, an organized person creates systems. You don't wait to become the identity before acting. You act your way into the identity. Environment also shapes identity. If everyone around you sees you as the comedian, the procrastinator, the reckless spender, or the unambitious friend, it becomes harder to step into a new role. Identity is socially reinforced. That means you must sometimes upgrade your environment to upgrade your identity. Spend time with people who normalize the identity you want to embody. If you want to be an athlete, being around athletes makes it obvious. If you want to be an entrepreneur, being around entrepreneurs makes it reasonable. Identity becomes easier when it is validated socially. There is another dimension: language. The words you use shape belief. Saying, I'm trying to quit smoking, is different from saying, I'm not a smoker. Saying, I'm trying to get healthy, is different from saying, I'm a healthy person now. Language crystallizes identity, and identity directs behavior. Replacing identity is not about pretending or delusion. It is about alignment. Aligning who you are with how you live. Aligning your systems with your standards. Aligning your habits with your story. When identity shifts, the system changes effortlessly, because the system matches the operator. When people finally succeed long-term, it's rarely because they found more motivation. It's because they became someone for whom the desired behaviors felt normal. When you replace identity, not just behavior, Success stops being something you fight for and becomes something you express. Chapter 15. Let time multiply the system. The final advantage of systems isn't speed, it's compounding. The world celebrates quick wins and overnight results, but the real gains come from time quietly multiplying the systems you've built. Time is the great amplifier. It takes small actions and turns them into large outcomes. It takes small improvements and turns them into massive transformations. But time can only multiply what already exists. If your routines are chaotic, time multiplies chaos. If your habits are destructive, time multiplies destruction. If your systems are effective, time multiplies effectiveness. Time doesn't care what you feed it, it just compounds it. This is why the most successful people play long-term games. They don't obsess over what they can get today. They obsess over what their system will produce 10 years from now. They understand that if you focus on building the machine instead of chasing the moment, the future becomes a predictable place. But most people are stuck in short-term cycles. They want the result now, the reward now, the validation now. They sacrifice the compounding effect of time in exchange for immediate gratification. That trade is always expensive. Compounding works differently in different arenas. In finance, compounding is mathematical. Dollars produce more dollars. In skills, compounding is developmental. Skills stack on top of skills. In relationships, compounding is relational. Trust deepens, opportunities increase, networks expand. In health, compounding is physiological. Small, consistent behaviors produce massive biological changes over time. When you zoom out far enough, compounding becomes the invisible engine behind every form of long-term success. The mistake is thinking compounding happens quickly. Compounding is slow at first, brutally slow. There is a long flat curve where it feels like nothing is happening. That's where most people quit. They don't realize that the first stage of compounding is accumulation. The second stage is acceleration, and the third stage is explosion. The accumulation stage feels unrewarding. The acceleration stage feels exciting. The explosion stage looks miraculous to everyone else. But miracles are just the final stage of a compounding system. This is why patience is not a passive virtue, it's strategic fuel. Patience allows compounding to finish what it started. Patience allows the system enough time to prove itself. Impatience is the enemy, because impatience demands visible progress constantly, and real progress rarely reveals itself on schedule. If you require immediate evidence that something is working, you'll abandon every system long before it pays off. Builders don't demand instant proof. They demand consistent execution. But compounding doesn't just require patience. It requires protection. Anything that breaks the system resets the compounding curve. In finance, it's debt or panic selling. In health, it's injury or neglect. In business, it's operational collapse. In personal growth, it's inconsistency. The longer a system runs without interruption, the more powerful the compounding becomes. Many people are not failing because their system doesn't work. They are failing because they reset the system too often. Every reset sends compounding back to day one. Consistency is the carrier of compounding. It's not the intensity of effort, but the continuity of effort that produces outsized results. Showing up every day beats showing up dramatically. Doing something small for 10 years beats doing something huge for 3 months. The world worships intensity because intensity is visible. But compounding worships consistency because consistency is durable. Intensity impresses people. Consistency builds empires. Another dimension of compounding is leverage. Once a system is built, you can layer more systems on top of it. Skills stack, relationships stack, assets stack, lessons stack, confidence stacks. Your life becomes a multi-system engine without you needing to reinvent yourself every year. The person who builds a writing system can later build a publishing system. The person who builds a fitness system can later build a performance system. The person who builds a financial system can later build an investment system. Systems don't just produce results, they produce optionality. But perhaps the most powerful part of compounding is identity compounding. When you repeatedly act in alignment with your systems, you start seeing yourself differently. You trust yourself. You know you can execute. Confidence becomes internal instead of borrowed. And once confidence compounds, you stop operating from insecurity and start operating from personal sovereignty. In the end, time is the ultimate partner. If you try to succeed without systems, time becomes your opponent, constantly reminding you that you're running out. But when you build systems, time becomes your ally, constantly multiplying what you've already put in motion. That is the moment when success stops being a chase and becomes a trajectory. The machine runs, the results accumulate, and the future bends in your favor. Conclusion. The modern world teaches us to chase success, to pursue the trophy, to obsess over outcomes, to hunger for validation, and to compete in a race without ever questioning the design of the race itself. But throughout this audiobook, you've learned something different, something older, quieter, and far more powerful. Success is not something you chase. Success is something you build into your life through systems. Systems are the structures that produce outcomes repeatedly, predictably, and sustainably. Systems turn desire into behavior, behavior into identity, identity into lifestyle, and lifestyle into legacy. Systems remove the need for constant motivation. Systems eliminate friction. Systems adapt as you grow. Systems allow time to multiply your efforts instead of erasing them. And when the systems are built well, success eventually has no choice but to arrive. But remember, systems are not built overnight. They are constructed piece by piece. They begin with clarity, knowing what you actually want and why it matters. They evolve through process, breaking big goals into small, repeatable actions. They are supported by environments that make the right choices easier and the wrong choices harder. They scale through delegation, automation, outsourcing, and collaboration. They endure through audits, adjustments, and maintenance. And ultimately they compound through time. The beautiful thing is that systems do not require perfection. They only require consistency. They don't ask you to be extraordinary. They simply ask you to show up. They don't demand heroic effort. They demand sustainable effort. Systems turn the extraordinary into the inevitable by making progress part of everyday life, rather than the result of rare bursts of inspiration. As you leave this audiobook, the question is no longer, how do I succeed? The question becomes, what systems must I build so that success becomes the natural output of my life? This mindset shift is what separates those who wish from those who build, those who hope from those who architect, those who dream from those who design. You don't need more motivation. You don't need more hustle. You don't need more fire. You need machinery, structures, habits, environments, and identities that work on your behalf, especially on the days when you don't feel like working at all. If you commit to building these systems, the future will take care of itself. Results will appear, momentum will grow, opportunities will surface, confidence will solidify, and time will become an ally instead of an enemy. So from this moment forward, stop measuring your life by output alone. Measure it by the strength of the systems that create those outputs. Because when the system is strong, success doesn't require force. It simply unfolds. Build systems first. Success will follow.